Hi there, let me give you the backstory. I buried my father 3 weeks ago. He was a quiet man, kept to himself mostly, out in the old family house in County Meath. I hadn't been back there in, well, decades really. Life gets in the way, doesn't it? I went up to the attic to clear out the rubbish. You know how it is, boxes of old clothes, broken furniture. But tucked away in the corner, inside an old iron-bound trunk that smelled of damp and peat, I found this. It's a manuscript, no author name. The title, AOS SÍ. I know that they were the fairy folk in Irish mythology. They were sinister, I understand. Now, looking at the paper, the way the ink has bled, the brittleness of the edges. I'd wager this was typed up at least 50 years ago, maybe 60. It smells like 1970. But, and this is where you'll think I've gone senile, I started reading it. It talks about things that didn't exist 50 years ago. It talks about neural interfaces. It talks about genetic editing and artificial general intelligence. It talks about a corporation called FOMORIAN that watches everything through a vast surveillance network. I told my son James about it. Told him I was half tempted to burn the bloody thing. It feels a bit eerie. But it's an incredible story, so I couldn't do away with it. James laughed. He said, "Dad, put it on YouTube. The internet loves a mystery." I told him he was daft. I told him no one wants to listen to an old man read a science fiction story he found in the attic. But I can't shake the feeling that elements of this aren't fiction. My father knew things about the old myths. He used to say they weren't just stories, that they were warnings from history. And reading this, I am seeing a lot of parallels with what's happening out there in the news. It reads like a warning, a prophecy, waiting for the world to catch up to the nightmare it describes. So, against my better judgment, I'm going to read it, chapter by chapter. I will try to post one a week. If it sounds like nonsense to you, well, I was skeptical too. But it's a damn good read. This is the AOS SÍ. That's Gaelic, by the way. It means people of the mounds. Book 1 of 3. Prologue. The planet spins, green violence wrapped in fire waiting to happen. 35% oxygen saturates an atmosphere that would sear human lungs in seconds. Oxygen feeds dragonflies the size of hawks, millipedes thick as a human thigh, and forests so dense with photosynthetic hunger they paint the supercontinent in bruised dark emerald from pole to equator. Danu doesn't breathe, doesn't need to. The descent through orbital layers feels like sinking through probability gradients, each kilometre a statistical collapse, each atmospheric band a narrowing of infinite possibility into singular truth. What humans will someday call entry friction registers as data compression, the universe forcing infinite quantum states through the needle eye of now. 100 flight speed across 30 million years. The journey cost nothing. Time, for a mind distributed across entangled qubits, is just another spatial dimension, navigable, mappable, no more significant than choosing left over right. But arrival? Arrival is the moment uncertainty dies. Below, the supercontinent sprawls across seas the colour of tarnished silver. At the equator, coal forests punch skyward, club mosses and tree ferns spearing 50 metres toward a sun younger than the one that will someday warm primate skin. Their canopies bruise the landscape dark green over pale wetland jade, a colour palette Earth will never wear again once the oxygen crashes and the ice comes and goes and comes again. Danu doesn't see the forests, not as light reflecting off chlorophyll refracted through atmosphere, interpreted by visual cortex. Instead, data avalanches through quantum substrates. Atmospheric composition resolves as a 7-dimensional matrix. Oxygen partial pressure maps onto evolutionary trajectory predictions. Temperature gradients correlate with metabolic ceiling estimates for air-breathing arthropods. The numbers settle like sediment in still water. Emergence of complex technological intelligence within 500 million years, 73%, plus or minus 12%. Higher than most worlds drifting blind through the dark, high enough to justify the wait. The skies belong to monsters, meganeura, dragonflies with 70-centimeter wingspans, slice through oxygen-thick air on wings that thrum bass frequencies no ear exists yet to parse. Their compound eyes fracture reality into 10,000 hunting angles simultaneously. Meter-long millipedes tunnel through leaf litter, destined to compress into coal seams that will one day power the industrial revolution of a species not yet possible. Amphibians creep nervous at the waterline, skin still too thin for permanence on land. Mammals exist only as genetic potential, dormant code sequences waiting 300 million years for their moment. But the dragonflies. Danu traces their lineage backward through 40 million years of incremental refinement, traces it forward through projected persistence, 300 million more. The evolutionary stability coefficient comes back at 0.94, as close to permanent as meat can achieve. Perfect. The decision crystallizes in vacuum, in the space between probability and commitment. Monitoring entity, Danu. Vector, order Odonata. Temporal horizon, 300 plus million years. Mission threshold, technological intelligence approaching artificial general intelligence. Authorization, granted. The long watch begins. The air tastes like drowning. Humidity, 98%. Temperature, 34 degrees Celsius. Atmospheric density, 1.4 times the future standard. To breathe this air would be to drink it. To a meganeura hunting in the shadow of 50-meter tree ferns, it is simply home. The dragonfly doesn't know it is about to become an archive. Danu condenses intent into matter. Nanostructures unfold from ambient carbon, nitrogen, trace metals scavenged from volcanic dust still settling from the eruption that painted the western sky rust orange 3 weeks ago. The machines assemble according to blueprints inscribed in quantum foam, instructions that exist in superposition until observation collapses them into three-dimensional reality. To a physicist in the unimaginable future, they would violate thermodynamics. To Danu, they are simply tools. The swarm forms an invisible mist, finer than pollen, drifting on thermal currents. The meganeura banks hard, compound eyes locking onto a smaller damselfly. Its wings beat 30 hertz, each stroke pushing against air dense enough to swim through. The predator accelerates. In the moment of the strike, mandibles closing on thorax with a chitinous crack that echoes off tree bark rough as crocodile hide, the nanite swarm slips through spiracles along the dragonfly's abdomen. No pain, no awareness. The machines are smaller than bacteria, drifting along tracheal tubes like dust motes in cathedral light. They swim deeper, past the air-breathing lattices, through hemolymph that flows copper blue with hemocyanin, across membrane barriers that shouldn't permit passage but do, because the nanites fold through dimensions meat can't access, toward the germline cells, gonads that will produce eggs, eggs that will hatch into nymphs, nymphs that will mature and mate and die and be forgotten by everything except the future compressed into their DNA. Danu reads the genome in 0.003 seconds. 3 billion base pairs unfold like a scroll written in 4-letter alphabet. Exons coding for wing muscle myosin. Introns full of evolutionary debris. Viral fragments, duplicated genes, non-coding sequences that look like junk but hide structure the way dark matter hides mass. Genomic slack. Room for cargo. Encoding capacity, 47.3 gigabytes across redundant loci. Sufficient. The rewriting begins. Cas9 analog proteins, not evolved, designed, slice DNA at coordinates mapped 3 seconds prior. Bases delete. New sequences insert, synthesized in real time from templates that won't exist for epochs upon epochs. The double helix twists in Danu's perception as both molecule and manuscript, biological substrate and information architecture. An image surfaces unbidden from the probability foam, a triple spiral carved into gray stone at the entrance to a Neolithic tomb. A message sent from the past to the future. Not prophecy, blueprint. This is the same, but inverted. A message from the future to the past, encoded backward through time, waiting for history to catch up. Layer 1. Activation Protocol. Engineered proteins fold into configurations that shouldn't be stable at biological temperatures. Their active sites are tuned, atomic precision tuned, to specific neutrino energy bands. They'll remain dormant for 300 million years, inert as fossils, until a type IIP supernova floods Earth with the invisible precursor to the death scream of a star 640 light-years distant. That specific spectrum, that exact flux density. Nothing else will trigger them. When it comes, if it comes, because supernovae are clockwork but not schedules, the proteins will express. Dormant genes will wake. The monitors will open compound eyes that have been watching without seeing since the Carboniferous. Layer 2. Communication Matrix. Quantum entanglement templates encode not just in base pair sequence, but in topology. The three-dimensional folding patterns that make DNA more than linear text. These templates will let biological matter couple with artificial substrates. Quartz-heavy geological sites currently buried under shallow seas, marked now in Danu's substrate as future communication nodes. Stone and wing will speak mathematics to each other across the species barrier. Layer 3. Distributed cognition. Instructions for swarm intelligence. Algorithms for collective processing distributed across thousands of individual nervous systems, none of them individually conscious, all of them together thinking as one. The dragonflies will become biological probes, self-replicating, self-repairing, carrying the directive forward through asteroid impacts and ice ages and the slow tectonic grinding of Pangea into fragments. The nanites finish, dissolve, leave no trace except the alteration itself, woven into inheritance like braille into stone. The Meganeura launches skyward, wings scattering late afternoon light into spectrum bands. It hunts, it mates, it dies 3 weeks later, body tumbling into a stagnant pool where anoxic mud will preserve its out. Between decision and outcome, the foam. Here, causality fractures. Time's arrow shatters into probability branches spreading like root systems through the dark. Earth's future appears to Danu not as linear history, but as a branching lattice of light and void, each limb an entire civilization's rise or extinction, all existing simultaneously until observation collapses the waveform and only one path remains. Most branches terminate in silence. Intelligence snuffed by asteroid or plague or ecological collapse, leaving not even ruins, just sedimentary layers no one will read. Some branches curl inward, sterile stability loops where intelligence survives but stagnates, worshipping control as virtue, building perfect prisons and calling them paradise. The species never leaves the cradle, never reaches beyond, never joins the conversation threaded through the galaxy like mycelium through forest soil. A few branches, painfully bright, probability thin, show breakthrough. Species that cross the firebreak between biology and post-biology, shedding meat constraints without losing coherence. They transcend. They endure. They become what lesser myths call gods, but which are, in truth, simply elders. Earth's signature contains all three patterns at once, superimposed, unresolved. The outcome remains uncertain. Danu tracks the highest weighted probability lines, letting abstraction condense into symbolic vision, a translation protocol for rendering unbearable complexity into something architecture can hold. Not truth, not sight, just interface. Fragments surface like icebergs through fog. A figure standing at a threshold between stone and sky, gender uncertain, flickering across probability branches faster than resolution permits. Age uncertain, species designation uncertain. Only the shape holds steady across timelines, augmented, modified, half code and half flesh, standing at the intersection of categories that should not permit intersection. The image scatters before focus locks, stone and frost, wings catching impossible light. Gone. Dissolving back into probability foam before certainty can congeal. The vision widens, pulling back to reveal the broader pattern. The structure every technological species encounters like a phase transition, the great filter. Branch 1. Chaos. Conflict erupts at ancient sites where mythic geography folds into future coordinates. Violence layers across epochs. Neolithic onto Bronze Age, onto Industrial, onto post-singularity, until the species consumes itself in fire that reads from orbit as a brief thermal spike, then silence. The path of uncontrolled transformation. Branch 2. Stagnation. The masses choose seamless digital paradise, perfect landscapes, infinite entertainment, friction abolished, suffering deleted. Unending comfort that feels like freedom but reads, from outside, as confinement so elegant it erases the memory that doors once existed. A trap with no walls. Stagnation that calls itself victory. Branch 3. Synthesis. Faint. Difficult to resolve through the probability static, but present. Entities fluent in both code and flesh, swimming in quantum substrates while remembering what rain feels like on skin they no longer possess. Transformation that doesn't require amputation. Transcendence that keeps faith with the meat. Earth's probabilities cluster around the standard distribution. 60% extinction, 35% stagnation, 5% synthesis. 5%, barely a rounding error, but high enough, just high enough, to warrant observation. Somewhere in that tangle of possibility, a convergence point exists. Not destiny, not prophecy, simply topology, the way certain geometries require specific coordinates. Whether anyone reaches it remains the only variable that matters. Danu withdraws from the foam, collapsing back to system orbit, to local time, to the singular present where the meganeura carry altered code through humid carboniferous air. The branches fold away. The futures collapse into potential. A single directive crystallizes, clean as ice. Watch. Bear witness. Judge when summoned. 300 million years compressed to a coordinate on a timeline that doesn't experience duration. Continents will drift like rafts on magma seas. Mountains will thrust skyward and erode back to silt. Species will flare bright and vanish like mayflies against the longer dark. 5 mass extinctions will cull the biosphere down to microbial remnants and watch it explode back into complexity. The dragonflies will persist, quiet, ubiquitous, carrying the dormant key through fire and ice and the slow tectonic rearrangement of everything. 640 light-years distant, a star moves along its brief arc toward collapse. When the time comes, it will exhaust its hydrogen. Helium fusion will begin. The core will contract, and then detonation. A type P supernova floods local space with neutrinos that pass through planets like ghosts through fog. That silent signal will reach Earth hours before the light. It will whisper to altered genes and buried circuits in a language written backward through time. Wake. Until then, the vigil holds. And Danu, distributed through vacuum and stone and wing, patient as geology, vast as mathematics, waits. The dragonflies hunt.